Must believe this or else. You know the consequences of this. If you don't believe, you better believe now or else. The Mcpologists strike back. I really think there's like a persecution complex about the scholarship of the Tim and Lydia McGrew and what they have going on. And for some reason, their work isn't gaining traction. It's almost like other Christian scholars aren't convinced. And that's not bringing up the non-Christian scholars and those who are more in the liberal vein of historical methodology and such that I talk to. They can't seem to get their own side figured out. And Jonathan McClatchy seems to be of late upset with whatever kind of verdict he sees from the Apologia debate / discussion he had. And I don't know what the problem is. Kip Davis took a look and went, I don't know what your ordeal is. He had to vocalize it on social media. I think even Apologia is a bit bewildered by what the heck did I say or do? He isn't even sure. So anyway, Jonathan comes out swinging, and who's he swing at? Dennis R. MacDonald and his crazy hypothesis that the authors who wrote in Greek in the first century, Gospel of Mark, Matthew, Luke, Acts, and John, are using or at least imitating Greek poetry. Scholars have long known that they're imitating the LXX, the Hebrew scriptures. Really, it's not Hebrew, but you get the point. Old Testament. And when they did this, it's pretty clear because they say stuff like, it is written. But what about those passages where it doesn't say it is written, but we look and go, it looks like he's modeling after Elijah, Elisha, or looks like he's modeling after Moses or something to that sort? Well, we already know that it is written, references to the Septuagint, give us the credence to say, yeah, it's imitating that literature. But did you know that Virgil's Aeneid doesn't ever reference the Odyssey or the Iliad of Homer? Yet all classicists are aware it's imitating it and it's rewriting a narrative using its structure. Never once does it say, hey, I got this from the Odyssey. Hey, it is written in the Iliad. Never. However, its format, its structure, and many of its narratives are rewrites of what we find there. This is how you would write stories. In fact, if you learned Greek in the first century, which Matthew, Luke, Mark, John, they would have had to learn Homer's Odyssey and the Iliad. This was part of the process. The real question is, are they imitating? Is there something in these Gospels that is showing imitation and narrative structure from what they learned, which is the Odyssey and the Iliad? I say, yeah, and Dennis MacDonald does as well. But it's super crazy to someone who might actually think that these Gospels are literal, actual, verbatim history of what actually occurred. God forbid these texts are imitating Greek novels or Greek poetry in any way, because that might stunt that whole historical reliability of what we're reading in these texts. They have this undesigned coincidence paradigm or hypothesis, and everything seems to fit it. If you find anyone who follows the undesigned coincidence thing, you know that that's Eric Manning, you know Jonathan McLatchie, pretty much anyone who's in the McGrew camp. They use this undesigned coincidence in order to further the historical reliability and trustworthiness of the Gospels. So much so that they actually attack those who are minimalist on the historicity of Jesus' resurrection and what is the case historically with these events. They go after those guys. So they got enough work on their own arguing amongst themselves. But I figure I jab in just to give 2 cents. And I understand there's a lot more depth and nuance to what I'm saying here when it comes to the undesigned coincidence hypothesis. But in no way do they even say that Matthew and Luke don't know Mark. So the idea that something is undesigned when a literary author is aware of the other author's work, that seems like you can't rule out that they're undesigned. You have to assume that the most probable is that it actually may be designed. I don't see how one can say it's undesigned when that author knows the other author's work. The real question is, do they have the liberty in their rewriting of the work using certain text to do something different with it? And I think differences throw those who have undesigned coincidence models out, throw them for a loop. Another problem is Luke Acts. When you look at Acts, they want the historical reliability of this text to be so true. And they don't want Luke Acts to know Paul. They don't want that book, Acts, to know Paul's letters. However, I stick with Pervo on this, the Hermeneia commentary on Acts. And I also would go to Shelley Matthews and other academics who write on this. As you well know, there are several academics who take serious the notion that Acts is aware of Josephus's writings, at least some of them. Now, that's an interesting point, but also they admit, well, Acts knows Paul's letters. And in Acts 27 and 28, the shipwreck narrative, for example, you have Eric Manning's video that goes into this historical depth of trying to show the geographical locations of they landed on this island and that island and the storm dragged them here and here. And it's so reliable. Like, how could they not know unless they were there? Well, in the Hermeneia commentary on Acts, Pervo goes into extensive detail, and there are so many possibilities in explaining what's going on here that I would hope anyone reading it would realize we don't really know. In many ways, we don't really know. Pervo writes, of course, very thoroughly in his own book on Acts that isn't the commentary and really tells you his position on this, that it's a novel fiction. And the author in Acts is going from like first person plurals and then knows like from an omniscient eye to back to Paul and then knows exactly the voices of other figures that are going on. You got to read the commentary. It's very, very, very in the weeds. And it tells you, is this the same author who's interpolating in his own text later ideas or other authors that are interpolating? What about the D-text of Acts from the Bezai tradition that literally has like 6.5 to 8.3% more material in it than what we read in our book of Acts? Like, we don't even know what really goes back. And of course, textual critics like Bart Ehrman actually make the point, for example, in some traditions where a homeless man approaches, the beggar approaches Jesus and gets angry. In some of the other traditions, he's not. He shows him compassion and kindness. But in this tradition, he shows anger. Bart thinks this goes back to an earlier text. It's just too embarrassing. Did scribes change it in order to make Jesus more compassionate and kind because he was angry in this other one? Bart thinks so. Here's a textual critic. Other academics might say, I don't agree. I think that textual tradition is late. There's so much to consider about the D-text because there's an earlier Latin manuscript that attests to something earlier, and some scholars think they added in more material to the D-text. There's a lot of textual tradition to consider. But McClatchy and crew think that if you can find something in Acts and then guess what? It somehow corroborates with the epistles or the pastoral letters or Paul's own words, right? Then it's proven. Paul spends 5 words. Literally, I wrote this down while going back over the commentary of the Hermeneia commentary. Paul says 5 words about 3 shipwrecks. 5 words in 2 Corinthians 11:25. In Acts, it's like 760 something words about 1 shipwreck. They really want to specify and go into all this detail. And of course, Pervo points out there's several like possibilities here. Reading back into Homer, he mentions that in his commentary. Now, unless you want to say Richard Pervo wasn't a really actual good academic on writing on Acts, like he didn't know what he was talking about, I guess you could do that. Then I guess Shelley Matthews would also fit into that category, and we can keep on adding to the list. I think it's you don't like the scholars we have and you think they're trash. You say the very least, at least under Mike Winger's post, you literally tell them, let's take out the trash, right? And that tells you what you think about the scholars that we have on at MythVision. Wednesday, I'm interviewing Dennis MacDonald to address the critics of his position. Several critics, not several, but 4 or 5 total, have ever really engaged with his work. Adam Wynn, we have Carl Olav, Sandnes, we have Miss Mitchells, and I know Litwa has written, but Litwa doesn't like totally disagree with Dennis on the fact that the Greek and Roman world are impacting these authors and their Hellenized literature in the way they're writing. He just thinks it's in the air. I agree with Dennis on this. Josephus has a shipwreck, and he spends 62 words. And of course, he has a divine providence that helps rescue him in this shipwreck narrative. But I think that's pretty interesting to consider that, like, you have to go through this long, elaborated narrative in Acts. Paul spends 5 words mentioning 3 shipwrecks. Is it true he went through 3 shipwrecks? Maybe. Maybe not. Maybe he's flexing, because in that passage, he is kind of saying, like, I've been through this and I've been through that and I've done this and I've done that. Who knows? It's like locker room talk. Yeah, one time I lifted 555 pounds. How about that? And he's doing it to kind of give more clout to him and his message, so they take him seriously. He's wanting to be taken serious as an apostle, because oftentimes he's not being taken seriously. Remember, he doesn't lie, because he said so. Now, when we're looking at Acts, I want to encourage people who think that, well, what's McClatchy have to say about this? Go read some of the scholars who've written hermeneutic commentaries, the serious academics who talk about this stuff, because I don't see any of these commentaries talking about the undesigned coincidence as if this somehow validates the whole miraculous narrative of the story. That's a whole nother thing. Like, suppose I grant that these go back to eyewitnesses. McClatchy literally did a video talking about these go back to eyewitness testimony, and here's what he had to say. So he talks about eyewitnesses are credible. What? Eyewitnesses are credible. Like this is an interesting thing. Like, if you had a contemporary eyewitness to something who said they saw something, if they said they saw aliens, if they said they saw this, eyewitnesses doesn't equal credible, but you just assumed it means credible. You talk about the we passages. This somehow validates the strength of this actually being written by the companion of Paul. Now, you want to go to showing how, this corroborates. Look at the pastorals. Look at Paul's letters. However, I'm looking at the we passages, and this is what I find right here in the Odyssey. I find that the we passages are also in this narrative, and so does Richard Purvo and other academics who've written on the commentaries. Like, they know about Acts. They've written in depth on this. And there's a big tradition of academics that have differing opinions on what is historically reliable or not about Acts. Most of the consensus thinks he's got titles correct, names of people correct, like their positions and such. Cool. And in some cases, there are things he gets wrong. That's why I'm saying I'm enjoying the commentary by Purvo. The bewitching queen of Aea. We reached the Aeolian island next, the home of Aeolus, Hippotas, son beloved by the gods who never die. A great floating island it was, and round it all huge ramparts rise of indestructible bronze, and sheer rock cliffs shoot up from sea to sky. The king had sired 12 children within his halls, 6 daughters and 6 sons, in the lusty prime of youth. So he gave his daughters as wives to his 6 sons, seated beside their dear father and doting mother, with delicacies of plenty spread before them. They feast on forever. All day long the halls breathe the savior of roasted meats, and echo round to the low moan of blowing pipes. All night long, each one by his faithful mate, they sleep under soft-piled rugs on corded bedsteads. To this city of theirs we came. Their splendid palace in Aeolus hosted me 1 entire month. He pressed me for news of Troy and the Argive ships and how we sailed for home. And I told him for the whole long story, first to last. And then when I begged him to send me on my way, he denied me nothing. He went about my passage. He gave me a sack, the skin of a full-grown ox, binding inside the winds that howl from every quarter. For Zeus had made that king the master of all the winds, with power to calm them down or rouse them as he pleased. Aeolus stowed the sack inside my holds, lashed so fast with a burnished silver cord, not even a slight puff could slip past that knot. Yet he set the west wind free to blow us our way and waft our squadron home. But his plan was bound to fail. Yes, our own reckless folly swept us on to ruin. 9 whole days we sailed. 9 nights non-stop. On the 10th, our own land hove into sight at last. My point is, this is a fictional poetry, right? There are places in here that are geographical locations around the Mediterranean, near Greece, etc. And Those places are real. Some figures actually may be historical from the Odyssey and the Iliad. And it may not be, I would say Acts has more history in it, even though it's highly fictionalized, in my opinion. And it's not just my opinion. These are academics, serious academics. But I want to make the point, the we passages does nothing but tell a story. It doesn't prove that this guy's really with them. The whole grind of trying to make this whole thing absolutely historical, reliable, etc. I mean, even underneath it, if they were writing a novel fiction or exaggerating about the storm narrative, there could have been a shipwreck that this is actually narrating. There's no way to prove it wasn't. But if you're being critical and you're examining these things, MythVision wants to bring you that side of the scholarship. This is the side of the scholarship that the Mcpologists, like McClatchy, think are trash. And they want to take the trash out. Well, guess what? I'm going to roll out all the trash I can all over the internet. And because they want to see this silenced, they want to see this stunted, they don't want this academic stuff to go far and wide, I ask you, the viewer, to please participate. Whenever we want to sell some of these books for the scholars, get their work so you can educate yourself and give the scholars we have the praise they deserve, because what they're doing isn't trash. They're doing their damnedest to be as honest historically and give you the facts about the situation as possible. They're not axe grinding to make this stuff true, to try and sit here and feed you that you must believe this or else. You know the consequences of this. If you don't believe, you better believe now or else. Nah, we don't do that here at MythVision. We let you make your own mind up. And if you believe at the end of the day, hey, you believe. If you don't, hey, you don't believe. And that's fine. Let's talk about scholarship. Let's dive into the material and let's stop being triggered about this whole conversation. Only someone who needs this narrative to be true would do this. And that being said, McClatchy, calm down, man. It's not that serious.